So many authors come to me and they say like, hey, I have this incredible vision of a book series I want to write, which is awesome. And so my goal in this video is help authors who have that kind of ambition to avoid some of the most common mistakes that I see as an editor. We're going to look at the 8 most common mistakes that authors make when trying to write a book series, and then I'm going to give you very practical advice on how you can sidestep those mistakes. Let's start with number 1, repetitive plot patterns. So the structure that worked for the first book in the series often is not the structure that's going to work for book 2 or book 3. What I see frequently is that authors want to repeat. They think, oh, this is what worked for book 1, this is what I feel most comfortable with, let's just do that again. If you're not writing an episodic series, which is basically where the whole storyline resets at the beginning of every single book, but you are writing more of an ongoing plot that's going to develop through the series, then these are the points you need to know. The first tip I have is to escalate. Let's look at the Hunger Games for an example of this. The first book is very much about personal survival, right? Winning the games and, not dying. But what are books 2 and 3 about? Books 2 and 3 get much more into a political message of like a wide-scale rebellion against the authorities. This is a clear escalation from personal survival into overthrowing the government. The second thing you can do in your series is to expand the genre. And for an example of this, let's look at Maze Runner. Book 1 is very much the mystery genre. They are in a contained environment. They wonder why they are there. They wonder what the maze is there for. It's a very self-contained story. But books 2 and 3, as they get out of that maze, the genre expands into this post-apocalyptic storyline with cranks, who are basically zombies. It also expands into kind of a dystopian genre where they are wondering, what's the ethics of testing on children in order to cure a disease? I know I've said before in other videos that you don't want to change genres within a single book, like from the beginning to the end, but I think you have a little bit more latitude when you're talking about a series, and you can expand the genre a little bit. Not change it wholesale, but just expand it a little. And the third technique that you can use when moving from book 1 into the rest of your series is to go panoramic. For this example, we're actually going to look at television, specifically the series The Wire. It has 5 different seasons, but each one takes a different view on the city of Baltimore. First season is about the drug trade, then we look at the docks in season 2, we look at City Hall, meaning politics, in season 3, we look at the school system or education in season 4, and in season 5 we look at the city through journalism, through the lens of media. So think of ways you can use this structure in your series. You could use a different character as the protagonist in each book of the series. You could imitate The Wire and choose a centralized place and then look at that place through different lenses and different characters. Now let's move on to the next point, which is the mistake I see most often with writers. So if you get nothing else from this video, please listen to what I'm about to say. Mistake number 2 is that writers wait until book 2 to deliver the goods. Sometimes when I'm delivering feedback on the first book in a series, I'll say, look, these are 5 things that you really need inside this book. And they come back to me and they say, oh, all 5 of those are in book 2. For one, that's awesome that they have like really good narrative instincts. They knew that they needed those things in the story, but they just waited too long to deliver them. The trouble is that no one's gonna read book 2 unless you shift a lot of that juicy material to book 1. So a lot of writers, because they have such an expansive story in their brain of what this whole series is, they spend too much time in book 1 focusing on things like world building, focusing on things like warming up, focusing on things like character building. And it's like, no. We need to get to the juicy plot right from the get-go. Check out this advice from Annie Dillard, who is one of my favorite writers. Pilgrim at Tinker Creek is the book that made me want to become a writer. She writes so beautifully and she is so wise. Check out this advice she gives. One of the things I know about writing is this: spend it all, shoot it, play it, lose it, all right away, every time. Do not hoard what seems good for a later place in the book or for another book. Give it all, give it now. Annie, I love you. Such good advice. Really good advice. Please don't save it for later. If you can think of it, put it in this book. There will always be more stuff that you can make up later. But if you have something good, put it in book 1. And hey, if you want a more structured series of videos that escalate and talk about a single topic, I would recommend that you check out my Bookfox Academy, where I have 10 different courses that help writers with all sorts of different topics. I also have PDFs, so that'll help you visualize the information, and quizzes, just so you can test your knowledge. There is a link in the description below. I'm telling the truth. Check it out and click on it. The third mistake we're going to focus on when writing a series is overstretching your premise. The Hobbit was not a trilogy. It was a single book, and not even that long of a book. It should never have been adapted into 3 movies. That was just sheer greed on behalf of Hollywood. It should have been 1 movie and not maybe the cartoon version from the 1980s, but a single live-action movie. So when you don't have enough source material, what do? Well, you end up throwing in stuff that doesn't work as well. There was also this forced expansion into romantic subplots between Tauriel and Keely. And also what were really minor scenes in the actual book were expanded to these gigantic action sequences, like the orc battles, like Gandalf's quest, like orcs pursuing them. So the question I have for you is, do you have enough story material for a series? Because if you don't, I mean, there's nothing wrong with writing just a single book. There's nothing wrong with it. It might be a longer book, but don't throw in extra fodder just to pad your storyline so you can get more books in the series. Now, on the other hand, I should say that a lot of writers have the opposite problem, is that their creativity is far too expansive, and their problem is the inability to control and to manage the premise's growth. I'm sure you're thinking about it already, but George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, he hasn't finished that series. And you know what? He's probably going to die before he finishes that series because he had so much material he couldn't finish it. And HBO sort of, told the rest of his storyline, so he kind of doesn't have to finish it maybe in his mind. But my point is that when you have hundreds of characters and hundreds of subplots, it becomes very difficult to provide closure for all of that. For you authors who struggle with this, I love that you're so good at generation and creativity. What you have to work on is being just as good at closure, because you don't want to be known as the J.J. Abrams who writes great beginnings but can't write an ending. This fourth mistake is a really tricky one. It's probably the one I get asked about the most when I'm talking to authors about series. It is number 4. Not enough closure in book number 1. So when you're writing book number 1, there is a tension between it being a standalone book and part of a longer story. And the mistake that a lot of authors make is they lean too far toward the direction of making it part of a larger story, which means it doesn't feel satisfying enough as a standalone book. And there are 2 mistakes that authors make with the ending of book number 1. The first one is a cliffhanger ending. And nothing wrong with a cliffhanger ending, but it can be too cliffhangery, and let me explain what I mean by that. Too cliffhangery ending is kind of abusive toward the reader because it leaves too many things hanging, and the reader's like, you're just making me buy the next book, and they get a little peeved at that. I think your goal, even with the first book into a series, is to resolve a bunch of stuff, perhaps most stuff, and only leave 1 or 2 plot threads open. Now, the second mistake that you can make is a kind of whimper ending. This is usually done by authors who have conceived of their series as being this one long story that they're just happening to break up at random points. So to the reader, this feels more like the end of a chapter than really the end of a book. So how you solve this problem is you really need to think about the end of that book as if you are writing a standalone book. Have the climax, have the resolution, really wrap things up for the writer so that they feel like they're not being cheated. And while we're talking on the topic of endings, that brings us to point number 5, which is the ending of book 3 is a book ending instead of a series ending. Now, obviously, if you're not writing a trilogy, it might be book 5 or book 7 or whatever, but I think the point still holds. Your goal with the very last book in your series is to address problems that were present even in book 1. Address problems that span the entirety of your series. Let's go back to Hunger Games for an example. Katniss has been trying to choose between 2 romantic partners for the entire series, Peter the baker and Gale the miner. That tension has been kept up for the whole series. She had to pretend to be in love in Peter for the sake of survival in the games, but then she would remember the rich childhood that she had with Gale. So her decision about who to choose is not the ending to a book in the series, but it has to be the ending to the entire series. And another example might be Lord of the Rings. At the end of Lord of the Rings, how do we make that feel like a series ending rather than a book ending? 1, we have an absolutely massive clash of armies. That's the very dramatic aspect. And then 2, we have the destruction of the ring, which brings that entire arc of that storyline to a close. This next mistake is particularly problematic and particularly pervasive. It is number 6, committing middle book syndrome. When you are writing a series, it is natural that some books end up being way stations, sort of connecting the previous book to the next book, but it's not particularly exciting. This often happens in trilogy in book number 2, because book number 1 had this great idea of introducing the world, which is super entertaining. Book number 3 has this great mission of solving all the problems and resolving everything, which is very entertaining. Book number 2, though, ends up being this kind of redheaded stepchild with not much of a task, and there's a lot of wheels spinning going on. Now, obviously, if you're writing a 5-book series or a 7-book series, hey, this could be book number 4, or it could be book number 5. You know, it's flexible, but the point is this is a frequent problem that writers encounter with series. But one technique I'd like to introduce to you is one used by Catching Fire, which is the 2nd book in the Hunger Games series. The technique I want to teach you is one called bridging. And this is where a middle child book is both looking back at the entertainment of the first book and then looking forward to the entertainment of the next book. Now, the way that Catching Fire looks back is that it's still using that fun fight to the death formula in an arena with strong social media overtones that was so popular with book number 1. That's still in book number 2, but it's also bridging between the books by looking forward. Book 3 is all about political upheaval and political rebellion, right? So this book is laying all the foundation for politics to get very, very messy and for the rebellion to take form. Really, the middle of your series has enormous potential because it can draw from all the narrative entertainments from the beginning of the series and later on in the series. I'll also say this, that another characteristic of the middle book syndrome is the character carousel. What I see a lot of authors do is they get a little bit stuck in the middle of the series, and so what they do to get out of that is to throw in new characters. Because why not? But that focus on character novelty rather than developing and complexifying the characters you already have really gets you in a jam, because now the next book in the series is going to have to continue all the characters that you threw in book 1, but also the new characters that you developed in book 2. It creates a lot of problems for you later on. So as a very general principle, work on deepening your characters in the middle child series book rather than expanding to a bigger character stable. The 7th mistake that some authors make when writing a series is afraid to jump time and characters. As I look through a number of series that are out there, there are a lot of series that do pretty significant jumps in both time and switching up of the central characters. I mean, just look at the Narnia series. The gap between The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Prince Caspian, it's only 1 year in our world, but it's 1,300 years in the Narnian world. So it's not just a time jump, it also involves a huge change of characters as well. Or the gap between The Voyage of the Dawn Treader to The Silver Chair, it's about a 70-year time gap. So once again, not just a time gap, but also character changes. Or look at the series Foundation. The jump between Foundation and Empire is about 300 years. Although Foundation covers like 200 years, so really it's like 100 years, but still, that's a lot of time jumping between books in a series. And then Foundation's Edge takes place 500 years after the original trilogy. Or if you look at Dune, the gap between Children of Dune and God Emperor of Dune is 3,500 years. And then Heretics of Dune is 1,500 years later. So obviously this works really well when you're writing fantasy or sci-fi, but I'd argue you could also use it for historical fiction. You could also use it for dystopian fiction. There's a lot of fiction out there when you're writing a series where a big time jump, don't be afraid of it. It's okay to do. There's lots of justification for why it's a good reason to do it. And now it's time for the last and final reason why your book series might fail after book 1, and it is number 8. Trying to write a single book rather than a series. I have authors come to me all the time and they're like, hey, I have a 300,000 word novel. Will you edit it for me? And I have to tell them right away, like, okay, I don't think you have a 300,000 word novel. I think you have a trilogy that you need to split into 3 books. And this is for a few reasons. One, it is incredibly more difficult to publish a longer book. You will lose money because of printing costs. You will lose money because of editing costs. So the amount that you can sell that book for is equal to what you could sell a 70,000 word book for. When you write a 300,000 word book, you're basically giving away 2 books for free and only charging for a single book. The advantage of splitting a big book into a series instead is that it's less intimidating for the reader. They don't have to say like, oh, let me read a book. They can just say like, oh, let me check out this first book in the series. If I like it, I'll continue reading. Picking the stopping points for your series, picking the places where a book ends and where the next book begins is probably one of the most important tasks that you have when you're writing a book series. And yes, I know length is often dependent upon the genre you're writing. Some genres definitely ask for much longer books, but the shorter you can make each book in the series, the more easier it will be to control your narrative and to pick the right points to stop at and pick the right points to begin again. Okay, do not forget to check out the link below to Bookfox Academy. And as you are writing all of your wonderful, brilliant book series, I wish you the best of luck.